Monticello Plantation, Albemarle County, Virginia, late October 1851. The first hard frost had come early that year, silvering the tobacco leaves and turning the breath of the field hands into small white ghosts that vanished before they reached the sky. Inside the great house the fires were already roaring, and every mirror in every room had been draped with black silk, because old Mistress Whitlock, Nathaniel's widow, had died the winter before, and the official mourning still dragged on. Elijah carried the breakfast tray up the back stairs as he had done every morning for the last 12 years. The silver coffee pot trembled slightly in his hand, not from weakness, but because he had learned long ago that the slightest rattle of china could earn a slap from Mrs. Eliza Whitlock, if she was in one of her moods. He paused at the landing, adjusted the tray so the toast points formed perfect right angles, and stepped into the morning room. James Whitlock sat at the head of the table, reading the Richmond Enquirer. He did not look up when Elijah entered. He never looked up. Not once in 27 years had he met Elijah's eyes for longer than the flick of a heartbeat. "Coffee, sir," Elijah said, voice low and even, the way he had been taught. James turned a page. "Leave it." Elijah poured. The stream of coffee caught a light like dark blood. When he straightened, his reflection slid across the polished surface of the pot. High forehead, straight nose, the exact same widow's peak that James Whitlock had, the same mouth that looked stern even when it was trying not to. For a moment the two faces existed side by side, master and servant, 34 and 28, white and black, owner and owned, divided only by a thin skin of silver. Eliza Whitlock entered then, skirts rustling like dry leaves. She stopped dead when she saw Elijah still standing there. Her eyes flicked from her husband to the servant and back again, quick as a lizard's tongue tasting danger. "Elijah," she said, too sweetly, "the Richmond cousins arrive tomorrow. You will be needed in the stables all day. Jacob will serve." "Yes, ma'am." He bowed and left. As he passed her, Eliza's fingers brushed the air near his sleeve, not touching, never touching, but close enough that he felt the cold warning in them. Down in the kitchen, old Aunt Sukey was shelling peas into a wooden bowl. She didn't look up either, but her mouth tightened. "Richmond cousins comin'," she muttered. "That mean you gotta disappear again, boy." Elijah set the tray down. "Reckon so." Sukey glanced toward the door, then leaned closer. "I was here when you was born, Elijah. I held your mama while she screamed. I seen the old master comin' out that room with blood on his shirt and the devil in his eye. Ain't nobody in this house don't know whose face you wearin'." Elijah said nothing. He had heard the whispers all his life. He had seen the way visiting gentlemen sometimes stared too long and then laughed too loud, the way ladies pressed handkerchiefs to their mouths. He had learned to keep his eyes on the floorboards and his thoughts locked behind his teeth. But the floorboards were old, and thoughts have a way of leaking through cracks. 2 weeks later, Dr. Calvin Reed arrived from Boston. He came with brass instruments in velvet-lined cases, a crate of books, and a letter of introduction from the University of Virginia praising his work in craniometric comparison across the races. James Whitlock, who fancied himself a man of science the way some men fancy themselves poets, welcomed him like visiting royalty. For 3 days, Reed measured the heads of every white person on the place,
James, Eliza, their daughter Louisa, their son Nathaniel II, even the overseer's wife who came over curious. He wrote numbers in a black ledger, nodded sagely, murmured Latin phrases. The fourth day he asked almost casually if he might examine a few of the house Negroes for comparison.
James hesitated only a moment. Of course, purely scientific. They started with Jacob the butler, then Aunt Sukey, then two little girls from the laundry. Reed was polite, brisk, impersonal. Then he came to Elijah. Elijah stood in the library while the afternoon sun slanted through the windows and turned the dust into gold. Reed circled him slowly, calipers cold against his skull. "Remarkable frontal slope," the doctor murmured. "Occipital angle nearly identical to... extraordinary." He made Elijah turn, made him tilt his head, measured the distance between the eyes, the width of the jaw, the exact curve of the ear. When he stepped back, his face had gone very still. "Mr. Whitlock," he called toward the doorway where James lingered, pretending to read a newspaper, "might I have a word in private?" They went into the study. The door closed. Elijah remained standing between the globe and the portrait of Nathaniel Whitlock in his militia uniform, painted in 1820, when the old master was 36 and Elijah was not yet conceived. The painted eyes stared down at the living ones with perfect, merciless recognition. 10 minutes later, the study door opened again. James' face was the color of tallow. Dr. Reed's was hard and bright as new steel. That night, after the house was asleep, Elijah was summoned to the summer kitchen where Reed waited alone by the dying fire. The doctor pressed a folded paper into his hand. "Read it when you're safe," he whispered. "Then burn it. But remember every word." Elijah slipped the note inside his shirt against the skin where his heart beat too loud. Later, in the loft above the stables, by the light of a single tallow dip, he unfolded the paper. The handwriting was hurried but clear. "You are Elijah Whitlock, born 9th of April, 1824, to Ellie, house girl, and Nathaniel Whitlock, master of this plantation. Your skull is his skull. Your blood is his blood. You are his son. His brother sits at the table you serve. The law calls you property. God calls you brother. Choose which voice you will answer to." Elijah read it 3 times. Then he held the paper to the flame and watched his name, his real name, curl into black ash that drifted up through the cracks in the roof toward a sky that had never belonged to him. But for the first time in 28 years, the sky looked close enough to touch. Monticello Plantation, Virginia, August 1855 to December 1858. The fever came in the summer of 1855 like God's own judgment. It started in Charlottesville, swept up the Rivanna River on the wings of mosquitoes, and settled over the county like yellow smoke. First the field hands fell, then the overseer's children. Then, on the 14th of August, Miss Louisa Whitlock collapsed in the rose garden while cutting blooms for the dinner table. By nightfall, she was burning. By morning, she was bleeding from the nose and gums. By the 3rd day, the whites of her eyes had turned the color of old gold. The Charlottesville doctor came and went, shaking his head. The Richmond doctor came and bled her until she fainted. The 3rd doctor, a German with wild white hair, spoke of black vomit and certain death. James Whitlock sent riders to every plantation within 50 miles, begging for quinine, for ice, for prayers. On the 6th night, Louisa stopped breathing for so long that Eliza screamed and would not stop screaming until they carried her from the room. In the hallway, James stood alone, coatless, hair wild, staring at the closed bedroom door, as though he could will his daughter back through it by sheer force of ownership. Old Dr. Haskins, the county physician who had delivered every Whitlock child since 1810, pulled him aside. "There is one thing left," he said quietly. "I have done it twice in New Orleans. Both times the patient lived. But it is irregular." James did not ask what it was. He only said, "Do it." They cleared the dining room, laid Louisa on the mahogany table where 3 generations of Whitlocks had carved their initials, brought in lamps, boiling water, rubber tubing stolen from a chemistry set, and 2 glass syringes the size of turkey basters. They tested James first. His blood clotted almost instantly in the tube. Louisa's veins rejected it with a violence that made her convulse. Eliza's blood caused a rash to bloom across Louisa's chest like red lace. Young Nathaniel's was too thin. The boy was only 13 and terrified. Dr. Haskins wiped sweat from his eyes. "We need healthy blood, strong blood, blood that will not fight hers." James knew before the doctor spoke the name. "Elijah," he said. His voice cracked on the single syllable like ice breaking. They found Elijah in the stables, mending a bridle by lantern light. 2 field hands dragged him to the house. He did not resist. He had learned long ago that resistance only made the bruises last longer. In the dining room, they tied him to a chair beside the table, stripped his shirt to the waist. The rope cut into his wrists. Louisa lay 6 feet away, unconscious, her lips black with blood. Dr. Haskins hesitated. "It will take more than a pint, maybe a quart. He may not survive it." James looked at Elijah for the first time in 28 years, really looked. The eyes that met his were his father's eyes, Nathaniel Whitlock's eyes, his own eyes. "Do it," James said. They cut Elijah's arm above the elbow. The blood came thick and dark and steady. Elijah's head fell forward. Only the ropes kept him upright. They filled jar after jar, carried them to Louisa, poured his life into her vein by clumsy syringe until her chest rose on its own and color crept back into her lips. When it was over, they untied Elijah and let him fall to the floor. He lay there in a pool of his own blood, while the family knelt around the table and wept over the daughter who had been given back to them. No one thanked him. No one looked at him again. They carried him to the quarters and left him on a corn-shuck mattress. Aunt Sukey sat beside him for 3 days, forcing sips of water between his cracked lips. On the 4th day, he opened his eyes and whispered, "Did she live?" "Yes, baby," Sukey said, tears cutting channels through the tobacco dust on her cheeks. "She lived." Elijah closed his eyes again. "Then it was worth it," he said, and slept for another week. Louisa recovered slowly. By October, she could sit on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the leaves turn blood red on the mountains. She watched Elijah, too. Watched him carry firewood with his left arm because the right one still trembled. Watched him pause sometimes, dizzy, leaning against a tree until the world stopped spinning. Watched the scar on his arm turn silver against his dark skin. One afternoon she left a book on the library windowsill, a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe, open to the page where Crusoe finds Friday's footprint. The next morning the book was gone. 3 days later it reappeared on the sill, a pressed maple leaf marking the page where Crusoe teaches Friday to speak. After that, the books came regularly. Walter Scott, Byron, a Latin primer, always returned with a leaf or a blade of grass to mark the place Elijah had reached. Louisa never saw him take them. She simply knew. In the spring of 1858, Aunt Beatrice arrived from Richmond, Eliza's older sister, childless, widowed, rich as Croesus from tobacco shares, and quietly, dangerously, an abolitionist. She took one look at Elijah serving at dinner, his sleeve still pinned to hide the tremor, and her eyes narrowed like a cat's. That night, Louisa knocked on her aunt's bedroom door. "I need your help," she said without greeting. "I'm going to buy him, and then I'm going to set him free." Beatrice did not ask why. She only asked, "How much?" $1,500, Louisa said. "Father will refuse, unless the price is too high to refuse without scandal." Beatrice smiled, the slow, satisfied smile of a woman who has waited 30 years for the perfect revenge. "Leave your father to me," she said. The sale was arranged in December, in the dead week between Christmas and New Year's, when no one of consequence was watching. James signed the bill of sale in the study, hand shaking so badly the ink bled. Beatrice paid in crisp Bank of Virginia notes. She did not smile when she counted them out. Elijah was told on December 27th that he now belonged to Mrs. Beatrice Langhorne of Richmond and would leave for Ohio after the holidays. He packed his belongings in a flour sack, one extra shirt, a carving knife he had made from a broken scythe, and the copy of Robinson Crusoe with the pressed leaves still between its pages. On the morning of departure, Louisa met him behind the smokehouse. She pressed a folded paper into his hand. "It's filed with the county clerk," she whispered. "My sworn testimony, your birth, the blood, everything. It can never be torn out again." Elijah looked at the paper, then at her. "You gave me back my name," he said. "I gave you back your life. Now we are even." Louisa's eyes filled. "No," she said, "we will never be even, but we are kin." He touched her cheek once, very lightly, the only time he ever touched a white woman without permission. Then he climbed into the carriage beside Beatrice and did not look back as Monticello Plantation shrank behind them, red brick and white columns swallowed by the bare winter trees. In the carriage, Beatrice handed him a new set of papers. Name, Elijah Freeman. Born 9th of April, 1824. Status, freeman of color. Destination, Cincinnati, Ohio. He read them 3 times. Then he looked out the window at the passing fields, where men like him still bent beneath the weight of the world. For the first time in 34 years he cried, silently so Beatrice would not hear. The carriage rolled north, carrying away the living proof that blood cannot be bought, sold, or legislated out of existence. Behind them, in the Albemarle County Courthouse, Louisa's deposition lay sealed in the records, permanent as iron, sharp as truth. The price of one drop had been paid in full. Virginia, summer 1862 to summer 1865. The war reached Monticello Plantation the way a slow fire reaches a dry barn. First a thin curl of smoke on the horizon, then the heat, then the roar that swallows everything. James Whitlock rode away in the spring of 1862 with the Albemarle troop, gray coat new, saber bright, eyes already dead. He was killed at Sharpsburg on the 17th of September, shot through the throat while trying to rally men who no longer believed in anything. His body came home in a pine box, face black with powder burns, and was buried under the cedars without ceremony. Eliza Whitlock watched the grave filled in, then walked back to the house, and did not speak again for 18 months. Nathaniel Whitlock II, 24 years old, thin as a fence rail, eyes too old for his face, became master of what was left, a mortgaged plantation, 92 frightened people, and a sister who had begun forging passes to carry wounded Union soldiers across the lines. Louisa was gone by the spring of 1863, working in the Union hospital tents outside Fredericksburg, sleeves rolled to the elbow, washing blood from strangers, because it was the only honest work left in the world. In July 1864, the war finally bit Nathaniel himself. The Battle of the Crater, Petersburg. A Minnesota regiment tunneled under the Confederate lines and filled the mine with 4 tons of powder. When it blew, the earth opened like the mouth of hell. Nathaniel was standing on the parapet giving orders when the sky fell upward. Shrapnel tore through his left lung. By nightfall, he lay in a warehouse hospital that had once been a tobacco barn, breathing blood, fever climbing. The surgeon, a tired man from Vermont with ink-stained fingers, told Louisa when she found him 3 days later, "He has hours, maybe a day. Infection has set in. Even if we had ice and morphine and a clean table, the lung is ruined." "I'm sorry, Miss Whitlock." Louisa looked at her brother's gray face, at the froth of blood on his lips, and felt something cold and clear settle in her chest. She wrote the letter that night by candle stub, hand steady. To Mr. Elijah Freeman, Cincinnati, Ohio. Nathaniel is dying of wound and fever. The doctors say nothing can save him but new blood. Yours worked once. It is the only chance. I will pay any price, risk any danger. Come, if you still count any Whitlock worth saving. Louisa Whitlock, City Point Hospital, Virginia. 30 July 1864. She paid a contraband runner $20 in greenbacks to carry it north through the lines. Elijah received it on the 5th of August. He read it standing in his workshop on 6th Street, sawdust on his boots, the smell of walnut oil in the air. Ruth, his wife, read it over his shoulder. Their daughter Grace, 6 years old, played with wood shavings at their feet. Ruth said only one word, "No." Elijah folded the letter and put it in his pocket. "I have to," he said. "You do not," Ruth answered, voice shaking. "You owe them nothing, less than nothing." "I owe Louisa my life," he said, "and I owe Nathaniel something harder to name." He left at dawn the next day with forged papers identifying him as Elijah Langhorne, body servant to Miss Louisa Whitlock, nurse. Beatrice, now 63, white-haired, fierce as ever, went with him as owner and shield.
They traveled by night, by freight car, by stolen rowboat across the Potomac, by ambulance wagon through Union lines. Twice they were stopped. Twice Beatrice's Richmond tongue and imperious glare bought them passage. Elijah kept his eyes down and his mouth shut, tasting iron every time he remembered how easily the old habits return.
They reached City Point on the 19th of August. Nathaniel was unconscious, skin hot and dry as parchment, breathing in wet gasps. The Vermont surgeon took one look at Elijah and shook his head. "This is madness. Even if the blood matches again, the risk of fever—" "He will die anyway," Louisa cut in. "Let us try." They did it on a door laid across 2 barrels in the corner of the warehouse where the air stank of gangrene and kerosene. Elijah lay on one side, Nathaniel on the other, arms stretched across the gap like 2 men shaking hands across a grave. The rubber tube was new, the needles were not. When Elijah's blood began to flow into Nathaniel's vein, the younger man stirred and opened his eyes. He stared at Elijah for a long moment, pupils wide and black. "You came," he whispered, blood bubbling on his lips. "I came," Elijah said. Nathaniel tried to speak again, failed, closed his eyes. Elijah stayed 10 days. On the 7th day, Nathaniel's fever broke. On the 9th, he sat up and drank broth. On the 10th, he could speak without coughing blood. Before Elijah left, Nathaniel asked to be wheeled outside to the shade of a locust tree. They sat alone, 2 men who looked enough alike to be brothers, dressed worlds apart. Nathaniel spoke first. "I used to watch you polish the silver when I was a boy. I hated you because you were better at it than I was. I hated you because Father couldn't look at you. I hated you because you existed." He stopped, breathing hard. "I was a child," he said. "I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm only saying I see it now." Elijah said nothing for a long time. Then, "When this war ends, what will you do with the land?" "Give it away," Nathaniel said without hesitation. 40 acres to every soul that wants it. The rest I'll sell to pay the taxes. I'll keep nothing that was bought with you." Elijah nodded once. "That's enough," he said. They did not embrace. They did not need to. Elijah and Beatrice left the next morning. Nathaniel watched the wagon until it disappeared in red dust. April 9th, 1865. Appomattox. Nathaniel came home on crutches, leg shattered again at 5 Forks, to find the big house half burned, the fields wild with weeds, the people free by law and penniless by fact. He did exactly what he promised. He walked the boundaries with a surveyor and a Bible, measured out 40-acre plots, wrote deeds in his own hand, signed every one. Nathaniel Whitlock, late master, now citizen. Some took the land and stayed. Some took the deed and walked north. A few old ones asked to be buried under the same cedars as the Whitlocks when their time came. Louisa came home in June, thin and gray at 31, and helped him finish the work. In the fall, Nathaniel rode to Cincinnati with 1 carpet-bag and a letter of introduction from his sister. He found Elijah's shop on 6th Street. The sign read simply, "Freeman and Son, Cabinet Makers." Inside, Elijah was planing a walnut board. His eldest boy, James, 10 years old and fearless, swept shavings. Nathaniel stood in the doorway until Elijah looked up. "I have no money, and no name worth having," Nathaniel said. "But I can swing a plane, and I learn fast. Will you take me on?" Elijah studied him for a long time. Then he handed him the plane. "Start with this board," he said. "Make it true." Years later, when both men were old and the shop had grown famous for its clean lines and honest joints, customers sometimes asked about the quiet Virginian who worked in the back corner and never spoke of the war. Elijah would only say, "That's my brother Nathaniel, best finisher I ever had." And that was all the acknowledgment either of them ever needed. The Whitlock name died with Nathaniel in 1908. The Freeman name is still carved in beautiful raised letters on museum pieces from Cincinnati to Richmond. Blood had been taken twice by force. It was given once by choice. In the end, the choice outlasted everything else.